In 1937, a Soviet bureaucrat in Moscow sits at his desk, carefully filling out paperwork. He's not filing tax returns. He's calculating how many people need to be shot this month to meet his quota. 2,000 miles away in Berlin, German engineers are solving a different problem: how to kill more efficiently. Their solution? Turning pesticide into a weapon of mass murder. Stalin versus Hitler? Whose ideas killed more people? Welcome to Historical Versus, the channel that puts history on trial. Tonight, we're tackling the darkest question in modern history. It's a grim competition nobody wants to win, where the contestants turned political theories into body counts that defy comprehension. On one side, Joseph Stalin's Marxist-Leninism promised a workers' paradise, but delivered gulags and engineered famines. On the other, Adolf Hitler's National Socialism offered a 1,000-year Reich, built on the ashes of entire races. You might think you already know the answer. After all, Stalin ruled for nearly 30 years, while Hitler only got 12. Stalin had the entire Soviet Union as his laboratory of terror. Hitler had to wait for a world war to really get going. But here's the thing about genocidal dictators: they don't play by the same rules. One kills you for what you think, the other for what you are. To judge this macabre contest fairly, we need criteria. We'll measure raw body counts, killing efficiency per year, ideological intent, geographic reach, and the horrors they planned but never finished, each weighted to reveal who engineered more death. And if they end up within 2/10 of a point, we invoke the tiebreaker. Whoever's ideology was more explicitly genocidal takes the crown nobody wants. But before we dive into the killing fields, plant this thought in your head. One of these men was stopped by external forces before his plans could fully unfold. The other died peacefully in his bed after decades of unopposed slaughter. Which scenario produced more corpses? First, the monsters, then their methods, finally, the scoreboard. Joseph Stalin wasn't even Russian. He was Georgian, born Ioseb Jugishvili. He took power after Lenin's death in 1924 through backstabbing and purges, turning the Communist Party into his personal murder weapon. His big idea? Socialism in one country, building a communist utopia in the USSR while the rest of the world could hang itself. Spoiler, the only thing that got built was a mountain of corpses. Meanwhile, Adolf Hitler, a failed Austrian painter with a Charlie Chaplin mustache, became Germany's chancellor in 1933 through backroom deals with conservatives who thought they could control him. That worked out about as well as you'd expect. His National Socialism wasn't socialist at all. It was a racial fever dream that divided humanity into master and slave races. Stalin obsessed over class enemies. Hitler obsessed over blood enemies. The tragic irony: both claimed to be building paradise. Stalin's would be achieved through liquidating hostile classes, Hitler's through liquidating inferior races. Both promised their followers a glorious future. Both delivered hell on earth. These weren't just parallel horror stories, they intersected. In 1939, these sworn enemies shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact, carving up Eastern Europe like two serial killers sharing a hunting ground. For 2 years, they were allied in all but name, each using the partnership to prepare for the real showdown they both knew was coming. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, it wasn't just a military clash, it was an ideological collision between two of history's most murderous worldviews. The Eastern Front became what historian Timothy Snyder calls the Bloodlands, where both regimes committed their worst atrocities, sometimes in the same territories, sometimes against the same people. Think about that. People who survived Stalin's terror only to face Hitler's Holocaust. Others who escaped Nazi death camps only to be thrown into Soviet gulags as traitors for having been captured. It's a cosmic joke with no punchline, just bodies. The stage is set. 2 monsters, 2 ideologies, millions of victims. Time to count the dead. You're a Chechen farmer in February 1944. Soviet soldiers bang on your door at 3 a.m. You have 15 minutes to pack your entire life into a suitcase. No explanation, no trial, no appeal. Your crime? Being born Chechen. Within days, your entire nation, nearly 500,000 people, gets stuffed into cattle cars and shipped to Kazakhstan. The mortality rate makes Black Friday stampedes look like yoga retreats. 1 in 4 of you won't survive the journey. This is Stalin's approach to problem solving. If an ethnic group might possibly be disloyal, delete the entire ethnicity. Bureaucratic, methodical, with 0 customer service. The numbers are staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, Stalin deported entire populations, 900,000 Volga Germans, 500,000 Chechens and Ingush, 200,000 Crimean Tatars, dozens of smaller groups. Official death toll, around 400,000. But here's the kicker. These deportations were so secret that when the Red Army liberated these regions from the Nazis, they found entire ethnic groups just missing. Like showing up to a party and discovering someone relocated the entire neighborhood. Exhibit: cattle cars to Kazakhstan. Stalin's defenders, yes, they exist, will argue these were necessary wartime security measures. Some groups had collaborated with the Nazis, they say. Sure, some individuals did, but Stalin's solution was to punish infants, grandmothers, and Communist Party members of the same ethnicity. That's like suspending an entire school because one kid cheated. Actually, it's worse. It's demolishing the school and sending everyone to Siberia. But ethnic deportation was just the warm-up act. Let's talk about Stalin's masterpiece of murder, the Holodomor. You're a Ukrainian peasant in 1932. The harvest wasn't terrible. You've hidden the small sack of grain under the floorboards, enough to keep your family alive through winter. Then the activists arrive. Communist Party zealots who search your home with metal rods, stabbing into walls and floors, hunting for hidden food like buried treasure. They find your stash. Congratulations, you're now a hoarder and an enemy of the people. The punishment? They take everything. Not just the hidden grain, everything edible in your house. But it gets worse. Stalin makes it illegal for you to find more. The law of spicklets, yes, that's its actual name, makes gleaning leftover grain from already harvested fields punishable by 10 years in the Gulag or execution. Picking up fallen grain, something biblical figures literally encouraged as charity, is now a capital offense. Ruth would have been shot in Stalin's Ukraine. The law of spicklets. The result, 3 to 7 million Ukrainians starved to death. Not because of drought, Not because of crop failure, because Stalin wanted to crush Ukrainian nationalism and fund his industrialization by selling confiscated grain abroad. He turned food into a weapon. While Ukrainians were dying in the streets, Soviet trains were exporting grain to Europe. It's genocide by enforced famine. Here's the sick part. Soviet propaganda denied it was happening. Foreign journalists who reported the starvation were branded liars. The New York Times Moscow correspondent Walter Duranty won a Pulitzer Prize for denying the famine even existed. Ukrainians were dying by the thousands daily, and the world's paper of record was running cover for their murderer. And if you think that's the floor of this horror, wait until you hear about the execution quotas. Here, you're an NKVD officer in 1937. You receive Order 00447. It's not a suggestion, it's a quota. Your region needs to arrest 2,000 people and execute 1,500 of them by month's end. For what crimes? Doesn't matter. The quota comes first, the charges come later. Some officers actually complained, not about the morality of mass murder, but about the logistics. How do you process that many executions efficiently? Quota killings. The Great Purge of 1936 to 1938 was bureaucratic terror at industrial scale. At least 700,000 were executed. Another million sent to gulags. Stalin targeted party members, military officers, intellectuals, ethnic minorities, and random citizens whose only crime was being in the wrong place when quotas needed filling. In some regions, officers exceeded their quotas, proudly reporting they'd found even more enemies than Moscow requested. The method: a bullet to the back of the head in a basement, usually at night. Bodies dumped in mass graves, families charged for the bullet. This wasn't war. This wasn't even political repression in any traditional sense. This was a paranoid dictator murdering his own people to maintain power through fear. Stalin's closest allies weren't safe. He executed generals who'd won wars for him. He purged party members who'd helped him rise to power. He even killed the man who ran his secret police, twice. First, he had Yagoda executed, then Yezhov, the man who'd replaced Yagoda and carried out most of the Great Purge. It's like firing your executioner by having him execute himself. The Gulag system deserves its own mention. Between 1930 and 1953, roughly 18 million people passed through Soviet labor camps. At least 1.6 million died there, from overwork, starvation, exposure, or execution. You could be sent to the Gulag for telling a joke about Stalin, for being late to work 3 times, for having a relative who'd been arrested. The Soviets built an entire economy on slave labor, where political prisoners mined gold, cut timber, and built infrastructure in conditions designed to kill them slowly. Here's Stalin's full resume of horror. The Holodomor killed 3 to 7 million. The Great Purge killed at least 700,000. Ethnic deportations killed 400,000. The gulags killed 1.6 million. Add in deaths from collectivization famines outside Ukraine, executions of Polish officers at Katyn, and casualties from Stalin's incompetent military purges that left the Soviet Union unprepared for Hitler's invasion, and you're looking at roughly 8 to 10 million deaths directly attributable to Stalin's policies. 8 million minimum, 10 million if you count generously, and every one of them was a deliberate choice. Stalin didn't stumble into genocide, he industrialized it. So that's Stalin, a paranoid emperor who turned an entire nation into a killing machine powered by quotas, fear, and frozen labor camps. Now let's meet the man who looked at all that and thought, I can do worse. You're a German bureaucrat in 1941, attending a meeting about agricultural policy. The presenter is explaining something called Generalplan Ost, the master plan for the East. You're expecting crop rotation schedules. Instead, you're writing down which percentage of each ethnic group needs to disappear. Poles, 85%, Ukrainians, 65%, Russians, 50 to 60%. The speaker isn't discussing deportation. He's calculating how many tens of millions will starve when Germany redirects Eastern European food to feed the Reich. Genocide planned with a methodical detail of a subway expansion. They created spreadsheets for extinction. Generalplan Ost, continental extinction. The plan's scope staggers comprehension. Over 60 million people were to be eliminated through starvation, deportation to Siberia, or outright murder. Survivors would become slaves for German settler colonies. They even calculated the calories. Urban populations would get zero food allocations. Rural populations would get just enough to work the fields for their German masters. The Nazis started implementing this during the war. The siege of Leningrad? Hitler specifically ordered the city starved rather than captured. 1 million civilians died eating wallpaper paste and leather belts while German soldiers shot anyone trying to escape. Soviet POWs? 3.3 million died in German captivity, mostly from deliberate starvation. That's a 57% mortality rate. American POWs in German camps had a 3.5% mortality rate. The difference? Americans were considered human. Here's the kicker. Generalplan Ost was never fully implemented. This was the preview. If Hitler had won, the death toll would have made Stalin look like a small-town serial killer. But Hitler wasn't satisfied with planning future genocides. He was already executing one in real time. You're a Jewish family in Warsaw, 1942. First, they forced you into a ghetto. 400,000 people crammed into 1.3 square miles. The ration is 184 calories per day. Not a typo. Then comes the knock. You're told you're being relocated for work. You're packed into cattle cars so tightly the dead remain standing. The journey takes days. No food, no water, no air. You arrive at Auschwitz. An SS doctor glances at you for 2 seconds and points left or right. Right means immediate death in gas chambers disguised as showers. Left means slow death through slave labor. Either way, you're not meant to survive. You're not a person anymore. You're raw material entering a factory. Zyklon B. Factory is the right word. The Nazis industrialized murder. Auschwitz-Birkenau could kill 6,000 people per day at peak efficiency. They had schedules, quotas, performance reviews. Rudolf Höss, the commandant, complained in reports when the crematoriums couldn't keep pace with the gas chambers. Corpse disposal became a bottleneck in the workflow. The Holocaust claimed 6 million Jewish lives, plus 5 to 6 million others. Roma, Poles, Soviet civilians, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men. 11 to 12 million people murdered for existing incorrectly. They killed 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. Entire communities that had existed for 1,000 years were erased in afternoons. The most chilling part? The bureaucracy. The Wannsee Conference, where the final solution was coordinated, lasted 90 minutes. They planned the murder of 11 million people over cognac and a lunch break. These weren't ravening monsters. They were middle managers with spreadsheets and train schedules. Eichmann, who organized the deportations, described himself as just a transportation specialist. Yeah, and Jeffrey Dahmer was just really into meal prep. The Wannsee Conference. Genocide by committee. Now, some will claim Hitler was responding to Versailles humiliation or economic desperation, that National Socialism was a defensive reaction to national trauma. Fine,
Britain and France suffered in World War I too. They didn't build death factories. Germany faced the Great Depression. So did America. FDR didn't gas disabled children. Economic hardship doesn't make you build industrial murder facilities. That requires a specific kind of evil, one that views entire categories of humanity as vermin to be exterminated. And Hitler didn't just murder through camps. Before they reached peak efficiency, he had another method: bullets. You're a Jewish resident of Kiev in September 1941. Posters order all Jews to report for resettlement. You show up with your family and valuables. Instead of deportation, you're marched to a ravine called Babi Yar. You're ordered to undress. You realize what's happening when you see the bodies in the pit. Over 2 days, 33,771 people are shot. The Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, wrote reports like sales figures. Area cleansed of Jews. One commander complained that shooting children affected his men's morale. The solution, apparently, was they started gassing people in vans. The real tragedy, apparently, was that mass murder stressed out the murderers. The Einsatzgruppen killed over 1.5 million Jews, plus hundreds of thousands of Roma and Soviet officials. Face-to-face killing on an industrial scale. Many shooters got drunk to cope. The psychological toll on the killers, not the victims, the killers, was why the Nazis developed gas chambers. They needed murder without eye contact. But even that innovation had a trial run on German citizens. You're a German parent in 1940. Your child has cerebral palsy. Nice doctors offer special treatment at a clinic in the countryside. You sign the papers. 6 weeks later, a death certificate claims pneumonia. Your child was actually murdered with carbon monoxide gas as part of a program to eliminate life unworthy of life. They killed 70,000 disabled people in gas chambers, then another 200,000 through starvation and lethal injection. The T4 program was the Holocaust's beta test. Same gas chambers, same crematoriums, same bureaucratic euphemisms, same personnel. T4 staff got promoted to running death camps, corporate career advancement through genocide. Here's the truly insane part. The Nazis documented everything. Train schedules of deportations, inventories of confiscated property, photographs of mass shootings. They built a genocide scrapbook. So proud of their murder machine, they preserved it for posterity. So, that's Hitler. A dictator who didn't just kill his enemies, he built an entire industrial system specifically designed to exterminate entire categories of human beings. 2 monsters, 2 methods. Time to count the corpses and see who wins history's most horrible contest.
The cases have been made. The evidence is in. It's time for the final showdown. Let's start with the raw numbers, because in this nightmare competition, every corpse counts. On raw death toll, weighted at 30%, Stalin's regime murdered between 6 and 10 million civilians through purges, famines, deportations, and the Gulag. We'll use 8 million, splitting conservative and moderate estimates. Hitler's regime murdered 11 to 12 million through the Holocaust, starvation policies, and mass shootings. We'll use 11.5 million. Stalin scores 7 out of 10. Hitler scores 10 out of 10. On killing efficiency, weighted at 25%. This is where it gets genuinely disturbing. Stalin ruled for 29 years and killed roughly 8 million. That's about 275,000 per year. Hitler got 12 years and killed 11.5 million, nearly 1 million per year. But most of Hitler's killing happened in just 6 years during the war. Peak efficiency? Hitler's regime was murdering people at nearly 4 times Stalin's rate. Stalin scores 3 out of 10 for sustained terror. Hitler scores 10 out of 10 for concentrated annihilation. On ideological intent, weighted at 20%. Stalin killed class enemies, political rivals, and suspect ethnicities to build socialism. The killing was a tool, not the goal. You could theoretically stop being a kulak. You could confess and recant. You could even survive the Gulag. Most did. Hitler's ideology demanded extermination. You couldn't stop being Jewish. You couldn't recant your genetics. The gas chambers had no exit doors. Stalin's Marxism-Leninism scores 6 out of 10, murderous but theoretically reformable. Hitler's Nazi socialism scores 10 out of 10, genocide as core feature, not bug. On scope of victims, weighted at 15%. Stalin mostly killed within Soviet borders. Sure, those borders spanned 11 time zones, but it was domestic terror, murdering his own citizens. Hitler murdered across an entire continent. Jews from France, Roma from Romania, Poles from Poland, disabled Germans from Germany. His victims spoke dozens of languages and came from over 20 countries. Stalin scores 5 out of 10. Hitler scores 10 out of 10. Finally, unrealized ambitions, weighted at 10%. Here's where that question from the beginning gets answered. Stalin could have kept killing indefinitely. He died in power after 3 decades, but there's no evidence he planned to exponentially increase the killing. He'd already murdered most of his target categories. Hitler, stopped by military defeat, had barely started. Generalplan Ost called for eliminating 60 million more people, 5 times his actual body count. Stalin had peaked. Hitler was just warming up. Stalin scores 3 out of 10 for lack of expansion plans. Hitler scores 10 out of 10 for documented genocidal ambitions that dwarf his actual body count. Totals: Stalin 5.1, Hitler 10.0. By the declared criteria, Hitler takes it. We didn't need the tiebreaker. The scoreboard alone settled it. Remember that bureaucrat from 1937 filling out execution quotas? Horrible, yes, but the German bureaucrat planning Generalplan Ost was designing the complete erasure of human civilizations. Stalin's regime was a meat grinder. Hitler's was an extinction machine. There's a proverbial Jewish proverb: if you save one life, you save the world entire. By that logic, both these men destroyed the world millions of times over. But Hitler's regime didn't just destroy worlds, they built an entire industry specifically designed to destroy them faster. They innovated in human extermination. They held conferences on murder efficiency. They gave performance reviews based on corpse processing metrics. Stalin killed like a paranoid emperor, brutally, extensively, but ultimately in service of holding power and transforming society. Hitler killed like a pest exterminator, systematically, scientifically, with the explicit goal of removing entire categories of human beings from existence. Both are monsters, but only one turned genocide into a science. The winner of history's most horrible competition is Adolf Hitler's Nazi socialism. Your prize: eternal infamy and a special place in whatever hell genocidal maniacs go to. And that answer to our opening question? Hitler achieved this body count in 12 years. Stalin got 29. Pure evil per unit of time? Hitler was outputting nearly 4 times the horror. One dictator died peacefully in bed after decades of unopposed slaughter. The other was stopped by external forces before his plans fully unfold. Turns out the one who got stopped still killed more and was planning horrors that would have dwarfed even this nightmare. The verdict is in. By every metric that matters: death toll, killing efficiency, ideological intent, geographic scope, and genocidal ambitions, Hitler's National Socialism was the deadlier ideology. Stalin was a mass murderer. Hitler was an extinction event in human form. Both promised utopia. Both perfected the machinery of murder. Here's what's truly terrifying. We compared a dictator who had 3 decades to perfect his killing machine against one who only got 12 years. Stalin played the long game of terror. Hitler speed-ran genocide. If Hitler had gotten Stalin's 30 years, the death toll would have been in the hundreds of millions. Generalplan Ost wasn't a fantasy. It was a business plan for continental extinction. Let me put this in perspective. Stalin's 8 million victims, if they held hands, they'd circle the earth. Hitler's 12 million, they'd wrap around 1.5 times. But Hitler's planned 60 million from Generalplan Ost. That chain of corpses would lap the planet 6 times. That's not war. That's not even genocide. That's attempted speciescide. Yet both men still have defenders. You'll find people online arguing Stalin was just a tough leader making hard choices for industrialization. You'll find neo-Nazis claiming the Holocaust was exaggerated. To these people, what the hell is wrong with you? These aren't controversial figures like Napoleon or Genghis Khan who killed millions but also changed history. These are men who turned their ideologies into death cults. Stalin perverted socialism into a paranoid killing machine. Hitler perverted nationalism into a racist apocalypse. The sickest joke? Both claimed paradise required mass murder, just breaking a few eggs to make history's omelette. Except the omelette was made of human suffering, and the eggs were actual people. Here's what really separates them. Stalin would kill you for what you thought. Hitler would kill you for what you were. Stalin's terror was a horrible tool. Hitler's terror was the entire point. But the most important lesson isn't who killed more, it's how they did it. Both regimes turned ordinary people into murderers. Your neighbor became an informant. Your doctor became an executioner. Your train conductor became a deportation specialist. They didn't just kill millions, they got millions more to help. That's the real horror. Not that monsters exist, but that they can make monsters of us all. Never again became again and again. Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur. We keep saying we've learned the lesson. The lesson keeps repeating in different languages with different faces, but the same result. Bodies stacked like cordwood in the name of some grand idea. 2 monsters entered history's ring. Hitler's National Socialism killed more efficiently, more deliberately, with clearer genocidal intent and far greater ambitions. By our criteria, he's history's heavyweight champion of horror. But asking who was worse is like asking whether you'd rather drown or burn. The answer is neither. The answer is never again. The verdict is in, but history is never that simple. Who gets your vote? Cast your judgment in the comments below. And speaking of history's brutal contests, our previous episode pitted deception against deception, the Trojan horse versus D-Day's Operation Fortitude. Which con job changed history more? The answer might surprise you. Next time on Historical Verses, Assassins versus Assassins. Who was more lethal, the Hashashin or the ninja? Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching Historical Verses.